Welcome back to our series of devotionals on the character of God as we find about it in the chapter 15 of Luke. Today's devotional is based on Luke chapter 15 verses 20 to 24. And if you have a Bibles with you, I would love to encourage you to open it and read it with me. It says, "And he arose and came to his father. But when he was still a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Bring out the best robe and put on him, and put a ring on his hand and sandal on his feet, and bring the fatted calf here and kill it. And let us eat and be merry. For this son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to be merry." The story today begins with the proper return of this prodigal son. You remember that yesterday he realizes the stupidity that he has done. He realizes the nonsense that his life has become apart and away from God, and he decides to come back home. But as he's deciding to coming back home, first he feels that he's very hungry, so he needs to come back home. But then he feels that maybe God is not going to accept me as a son again because I have messed up so badly. My sins cover me. I am filthy and I'm actually stinking of pig. But he decides to come back anyways. And you can just imagine that scene of a young man that was once healthy and strong, all bold, coming to his father saying, "Father, I wish you dead. Just give me the money. I want to live my life the way I want to live my life." Now he's coming back. Bare feet, filthy, stinking, humiliated, bankrupted, completely broke. Broken in spirit and financially. He's completely broken. He's a broken person, clothed in rags, coming back to his father, humiliating himself for a slice of bread. But look at what verse 20 says. "But when he was still a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion." I love the fact that this father was actually waiting for his son to return. That's why he's the very first person that sees this young man coming back home. I want you to take into consideration the context. Farms in the first century, they were all in the open in the rural areas, but the houses were all in small villages, meaning that everybody in that little village knew about that story. I want also you to remember that all the land in the Holy Land, or Canaan, the Promised Land, was a gift from God in the occasion of the Exodus. God gave him that land, and this kid made his father sell a portion of God's gift and spent the entire money in a faraway country. And now he's coming back home. But this father is the very first one to see his kid because he's the one that is waiting for him to return. He's able to recognize this kid walking down the road, bare feet, all in rags, coming back. And he's the first one to recognize him. And he has compassion on him. He feels the suffering of his own kid, and instead of waiting for him with his arms crossed on the porch of the house and say, "You need to repent, young man. You need to say sorry to everybody here. You need to make up for your mistakes." That's not what the Bible tells me the father does. The father runs, and the father falls on this kid's neck, and he kissed him. I want you to imagine the story. There is this young man living with the pigs, fighting the pigs for food. He's stinking. He's filthy with his sins. He's completely filthy. He's worthless. He is right. He's worthless. He does not have the rights to claim sonship with the Father again. But he comes back home and the Father sees him from afar because he's waiting. The Father never forgot about that son. He's thinking about that son every day. And he waits for that son. He's waiting. Then he runs. Then he falls on his neck. And then he kisses this filthy kid. I want you to notice that there was no time for this kid to take a shower before being hugged and kissed by his father. Because the father was not so much interested in his sins, he was interested in rescuing this kid. And of course, in the presence of the father, this kid would no longer stay filthy. I want you to understand that the story tells us that God accepts us the way we are, but once with Him, we never remain the way we were. You understand the difference? God accepts us the way we are, but in His presence, we never remain the way we were. And the father says, and the kid says, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight, and I'm no longer worthy to be called your son." And the father cuts the conversation right there. He doesn't finish the excuse. And the father says, "Bring out the best robe. I want you to have a robe to cover your filthiness, just like God covered Adam and Eve when they committed the sin back there in Genesis chapter 3, when they rebelled against God. I want you to put a ring. It was a sign that he belonged to the family. And I want to put sandal on his feet. It was a sign that he was no longer a slave to his sins. Being barefoot was one of the ways to identify a slave in ancient times. And kill the fatted calf. A fatted calf was enough to feed the whole village. In other words, Jesus is saying that once a sinner comes back home, there is joy in heaven. There's not this attitude of like, you messed up, huh? Yeah, but come back anyways. Better for you to be here. No, that's not what Jesus is saying. What Jesus is saying is that God receives us with His arms open wide. And then He deals with our filthiness. And then He deals with our shortcomings. But first, we need to come back home, because once you decide to come back home, there is a Father in heaven who loves you and will be waiting for you always. May God bless you.